What happens when a girl says no loudly in a town that only rewards obedience? What if the punishment wasn't the end of her story, but the beginning of something far more dangerous? Not rage, not revenge, but transformation. This isn't just the story of survival. It's the story of becoming, of a woman who walked away from fire and came back forged in it. In the heart of a dusty town called Hollow Rock, where the wind seemed to whisper old secrets and justice wore a crooked smile, a girl named Issa stood tied to a wooden post, barefoot, bleeding, her wrists bound behind her back like a criminal though. Her only crime was saying no. Ezra Pike, the richest trader in the valley, twice her age, had offered her father 5 acres and 2 mules in exchange for Issa's hand. To the townspeople, that wasn't just a good deal, it was a lifeline. But Issa didn't care for lifelines built on silence and submission. She said no, loudly, publicly, and in doing so, she shattered the quiet order that Hollow Rock thrived. So now, here she was, lashed to the same post used for livestock auctions. Her long braid, the one her mother used to braid each morning before illness stole her away, dragged in the dirt. Her back had already taken the first strike. And the town watched. Not in anger, not in empathy, but with that sickly curiosity small places carry, where fear wears the face of tradition. The sheriff called it the price of dishonor. He couldn't even look her in the eyes, but Issa didn't scream. She didn't beg. That's the part I can't shake. In a world that punishes women for having a voice, she kept hers, even in silence. Every time the whip cracked, it echoed louder inside the people watching than it did across her skin. It wasn't just pain, it was defiance in its rawest, most human form. And that's something towns like Hollow Rock can't tolerate. Because people who suffer without breaking become stories. And stories have power. Somewhere at the edge of the crowd, a figure stood still. Not part of the scene, but not quite separate either. A man cloaked in buckskin, arms crossed, eyes sharp as thunderclouds. His name was Taki, a Lakota trapper, though most in town only called him that ghost in the woods. He didn't flinch. When the whip landed again, he didn't speak. But he saw everything. And Issa saw him. Just for a second, through the pain, through the blur, she saw someone who didn't look away. That matters. Maybe more than we realize. Because when you've been beaten, humiliated, cast out by your own people, and one person sees you without pity or fear, it plants something. A seed of hope, of rebellion, of belief that you might still belong somewhere. Or to yourself, at least. No one knows why Taki was there that day. He didn't frequent the town square, and Hollow Rock never made him welcome. Maybe he heard what was coming. Maybe he was just passing through. But when the 4th lash hit and Issa collapsed into the post, it was Taki who turned and walked away. Not out of apathy, out of purpose. He didn't need to stay to understand what had happened. He had already chosen something in that moment. And though the rest of the town waved the sheriff on, called for 3 more lashes to restore honor, the moment was already shifting. You can feel it if you listen close. That ripple. That start of a crack in the foundation. Because Issa's silence wasn't weakness. It was armor. And someone had noticed. When the whip struck for the 5th time, she was no longer just a girl being punished. She was the spark of something coming. And someone. Taki was already carrying it into the forest like a flame sheltered from the wind. That was the moment the story changed. And Hollow Rock, for all its cruelty, would never be the same again. When the world you know turns its back on you, when even your own father won't meet your eyes as you bleed, what do you do? For Issa, the answer was simple. You walk away. Even if you're barefoot. Even if you're broken. Even if you have no plan, no food, no shelter, only the scraps of your willpower left to guide you. She fled Hollow Rock under the cover of darkness, her back burning, her blouse torn and stuck to raw skin. Every step was a gamble between pain and collapse. But she kept going, away from the town that had whipped her, away from the people who let it happen. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew it had to be somewhere else. Somewhere the soil didn't carry the taste of betrayal. Have you ever felt that kind of urgency? That need to escape, not just a place, but a version of yourself that someone else tried to define? That night, the forest became Issa's only witness. The wind whispered above, coyotes howled in the distance, and the cold crept into her bones like regret. Her legs eventually gave out near a rock face. She crawled into a hollow beneath tree roots, pressed her face to the dirt, and tried to forget her own name. The pain made time irrelevant. She floated between dreams and memory cracks of a whip, voices like smoke, silence as deep as sleep. And then she wasn't alone. The first thing she sensed was the scent pine, bark and something simmering over fire. A hand reached out, not to harm, but to help. She blinked through the haze and saw him. Taki, the Lakota man from the square. The silent observer. Now he was more than that. He was a presence, a choice, a lifeline, not given but offered. You shouldn't be alive, he said, not cruelly. Almost like a thought spoken aloud. When she tried to sit, pain surged so violently that she cried out. Taki caught her gently, placed a cloth on her wounds, and eased her down again. The wounds are deep. Some may scar. She looked at him confused, raw, ashamed, and whispered, "Why? Why did you bring me here?" He met her eyes steady. "As ever, because you didn't scream," he said. "They broke your skin, but not your spirit. Let that sink in. Because you didn't scream." That wasn't a compliment. It was a recognition. Taki saw in Issa something most people overlooked. Resilience that doesn't require applause. Strength that exists without spectacle. That kind of quiet defiance scares those in power, because they can't humiliate what refuses to collapse. In the stillness that followed, Issa felt something she hadn't known in days. Space, not comfort, not yet, but space to breathe, to exist, without explanation. It was the beginning of something wordless but powerful. She asked where they were going. Taki didn't answer right away. "To check the trail," he finally said. And when she asked if they would come for her, the town, Pike's men, his jaw tightened. They will. Of course they would. Hollow Rock couldn't just let her disappear. Not after she embarrassed the sheriff, not after she refused to be traded like cattle. She was a stain now. And stains in places like Hollow Rock get scrubbed out or buried. "You should have left me," she whispered. "I don't leave what I've chosen to protect." Those words, they hit like a stone. No one had ever said anything like that to her. Not her father. Not her neighbors. Not even her mother. Issa was no longer sure who she was. No home, no name, no future, but she was no longer entirely alone. And in that moment, under the branches of trees older than time, something shifted. Not just in the story, but in Issa herself, when she admitted, "I don't know how to survive out here." Taki simply looked to the forest and said, "Then learn." And that was the beginning, not of a rescue, but of a rebirth. Because sometimes, the ones who walk away from the fire aren't running. They're walking towards something greater. Something that still waits to be claimed. There's something about the forest. The way it humbles you, strips you down to your most essential self. Out there, there's no audience, no expectations. Just the wind, the cold, the ache in your body, and the quiet voice inside asking, will you break, or will you become something new? For Issa, the forest wasn't just a hiding place. It was where she began again. Her body was still healing, each breath a reminder of the lashes on her back, but something inside her had already shifted. She was no longer the girl tied to a post. She was something in between, wounded, yes, but not defeated. And as the days passed, she learned to let the wild teach her what the world never had. Taki didn't coddle her. He didn't hover. That wasn't his way. Instead, he showed her once how to bind wounds with moss, how to find rabbit tracks near the stream, how to boil roots until their bitterness turned into strength, and then stepped back, letting her fail, letting her earn it. And Issa did, slowly, awkwardly. At first her hands bled gathering bark. Her feet blistered. Her balance was poor. But she watched, she listened. And the forest, in its own quiet way, responded. It's strange how survival can feel like remembering something ancient. Something already inside you. It wasn't just about learning how to live. It was about reclaiming the right to. And somewhere between bruised mornings and quiet fireside nights, Issa began to understand she didn't need to go back to who she had been. That version of her was made for a world that tried to sell her off like livestock. That girl had been punished for having a voice. Now she was learning to speak again with every action, every footstep through pine needles, every scar that no longer begged for pity. One evening, as the fire cracked low, Taki handed her something. A leather cord with a carved pendant at its center, rough, simple, but beautiful in a way only truth can be. What is it? She asked. Your name, he said. She stared at the lines etched into the wood. What does it mean? One who walks through fire and lives. Think about that. Not just survives, but lives, fully, fiercely, without apology. It was more than a name. It was a reclaiming. Because she had lost everything, her home, her family, even the identity the town had forced upon her. But this was hers, chosen, earned, forged in pain, but not owned by it. And isn't that what real transformation is? Not the erasing of who you were, but the building of who you're becoming. Issa clutched the pendant, eyes burning, not from pain but from recognition. For the first time, she saw herself not as a victim, not as ruined, but as reborn. The forest hadn't just healed her wounds, it had awakened her will. She didn't speak much that night. Neither did Taki. Their silences had become something sacred, not awkward pauses, but places where meaning grew. Places where trust didn't need to be spoken to be felt, because survival isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the sound of a knife being sharpened, of water being boiled, of a breath drawn steady after too many nights filled with fear. And in those moments, Issa realized something else. This wasn't a temporary escape, it was a rebirth. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was learning how to exist on her own terms. She didn't need to be saved. She needed to remember that she could fight, that she was still here. And that still here is more powerful than anyone who tried to break her will ever understood. Fear doesn't always announce itself with a scream. Sometimes it's the sound of hooves in the distance. Sometimes it's the sudden silence of the forest, like the trees themselves are holding their breath. That's what Issa felt the morning Pike's men came for her, not with torches or shouting, not like angry villagers in a storybook. No, this was colder, sharper. 3 men in tan dusters moved like hunters, methodical, trained, sent not to question but to finish what the town had started. And they weren't strangers. They were the same men who had laughed when she bled in the square, who passed her father coins like her pain had a market value. She was gathering roots by the river bend. When she heard the branch snap behind her, she didn't freeze. She turned, low stance, knife in hand, breath steady. Just as Taki had taught her. In that moment, she didn't feel like prey anymore. She felt awake, like something inside her had finally stopped asking for permission. The first man lunged. She moved. Quick, deliberate. The blade met Flesh's forearm, split open, blood blooming. He howled, stumbled. The second grabbed her from behind, but Issa dropped her weight, drove her elbow into his ribs, and broke free. Her back screamed in pain, but pain was a familiar sound now. One she'd learned to hear without listening. Then came the click of a gun. The third man had drawn a pistol, and that's when Taki appeared. Silent as breath, he stepped from the trees. His bow already drawn. One arrow, one shot. Straight through the man's hand. The pistol clattered to the earth. The men looked stunned not by the injury, but by who stood before them. Issa, bloodied but unshaken, knife steady in her grip. She didn't flinch. She didn't plead that, she spoke. Voice calm, sharp as a blade. "Tell Pike," she said. "Next time he sends men, they won't leave breathing." There's something powerful about reclaiming your fear, about turning the story upside down. The hunted becoming the warning. The injured man spat. "You think this ends with you?" Taki stepped forward, his presence like thunder without sound. "It ends," he said, "when you stop trying to own what was never yours." And in that stillness, the shift became permanent. Issa was no longer running. She was standing. And that changes everything. Have you ever had a moment like that? A point in your life where you stopped trying to survive for someone and started living as someone. That's not just growth. That's evolution. And it rarely comes without a fight. Later, by the river, Issa washed her hands in silence. The blood trailed downstream, like it didn't belong to her anymore. "I didn't think I'd ever be able to fight again," she said. "But you did," Taki replied. "Not because I'm brave," she added, "because I had no choice." Taki knelt beside her. "Bravery," he said, "is doing it anyway." That stuck with me, because we often think bravery means being fearless. But real bravery is about acting in spite of the fear. It's looking death in the eye, not to challenge it, but to remind yourself that your life belongs to you. And that's exactly what Issa understood now. "They'll keep coming," she whispered. "Then we'll keep standing," Taki said. "Together." And for the first time, she didn't doubt it. That night, they didn't light a fire, not out of fear, but because the moonlight was enough. Their weapons lay at their sides. But their most powerful weapon was the decision they had made long ago, in silence, to fight not just for survival, but for self. There comes a moment in every story where the hero stops running, not from danger, but from their past. And instead of hiding, they walk right back into the fire they once barely escaped. Not to burn, but to be seen. Issa's return to Hollow Rock wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about confrontation, or even closure. It was about reclaiming something deeper: identity, truth, dignity, the kind of power that doesn't need a weapon because it carries its own weight just by standing. Still, she didn't ride in on a horse or march with a crowd. No spectacle. Just a woman with quiet steps and a steadier heart. A deer-hide cloak across her shoulders, her hair no longer braided with shame, but left to flow with purpose. Her eyes didn't scan for threats. They looked ahead. She returned not as the girl who had been whipped in the square, but as the woman who survived the wild and came back stronger. And the town felt it. You could see it in the way the baker dropped his dough mid-knead, in how a woman on the porch pulled her child closer without a word. Even the sheriff, halfway through a sentence, stopped cold when he saw her pass. No one dared speak. Not because they didn't recognize her, but because they did. And they didn't know what to do with that recognition. There's a certain kind of silence that once meant dominance in Hollow Rock. A silence that said, we control what is seen, heard, believed. But now that same silence had flipped. It no longer belonged to power. It belonged to fear. Issa walked straight to the general store and placed a small satchel on the counter. "For Martha Whitlow's cough," she said. "And for Annie's fever. Boil it 3 times daily." The storekeeper didn't question her. He just nodded, stunned, wordless. She moved on, passing Pike's office without even glancing at the window where his shadow lingered behind the curtains. No words, no gestures, just presence. And somehow that presence spoke louder than any threat. Word spread fast. By dusk, children peeked from alleyways. Men muttered, women stared. But no one tried to stop her. Not because they'd forgiven her, but because they no longer could control her. Taki stood at the edge of the square, arms crossed, watching. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence, like hers, was quiet thunder. When Issa left, she returned to the ridge before nightfall. The weight of the town's silence followed her like smoke. "They're afraid," she said softly. Taki nodded. "Good." She sat by the fire, fingers tracing the pendant around her neck, the one he had carved, the one that bore the name she had become. "It's not about revenge," she said. "It's about being seen." And that's it, isn't it? We don't always want justice as loudly as we think. Sometimes what we need most is just to be acknowledged, to walk into the space where we were once broken and say, "I'm still here. You didn't erase me." Issa wasn't seeking to reclaim her place in Hollow Rock. She wasn't asking for acceptance. She didn't want their forgiveness. What she wanted, what she claimed, was her existence. And that is far more powerful than any retaliation. Because real power isn't in making people pay. It's in making them remember the moment they tried to bury you and failed. Some battles don't happen in the middle of war. They happen by a quiet river under the morning sun, when you least expect them, but most need them. That's where Issa was when it happened. Near the bend in the creek, where she often gathered roots, healing herbs, pieces of the earth that had once saved her life. The place had become sacred to her, a space of peace, of quiet power. But peace never lasts when fear still has something to lose. Pike wasn't done. Not yet. He didn't send another crowd. He didn't bring the law. He sent what cowards always send when they don't have the courage to face you men with knives. Silent footsteps and orders, 3 of them. They thought she would be alone. They thought she would be soft. They were wrong on both counts. The moment the first branch snapped behind her, Issa didn't hesitate. Her body moved like it had been waiting for this. Her stance dropped. Her hand found the knife tucked in her waistband. Her breath slowed, deliberate, trained. Not fearless, focused. The first man lunged. She didn't back away. She met him head on, the blade slashing across his forearm. Blood. A scream. He stumbled, not used to women who don't fold. The second grabbed her from behind. She dropped low, just as Taki had taught her. Her elbow struck ribs. A snap. A gasp. She twisted free. Pain flared in her back, but she didn't stop. Because pain was no longer a warning. It was fuel. The third man had a pistol. Issa turned, ready to move, even if she wasn't sure how far she'd get. But she didn't have to. Taki stepped from the trees like shadow made flesh. His bow was already drawn. One clean shot. The arrow ripped through the man's hand before he could pull the trigger. The gun hit the dirt. The man screamed. Silence followed, except for Issa's voice. Clear, steady, cold. "Tell Pike," she said, "next time he sends men, they won't leave breathing." Let's pause right there. That sentence, it wasn't bravado. It wasn't rage. It was truth. And that kind of truth is dangerous in a world that profits off silence. Because the moment someone who was once powerless stands their ground, the whole structure trembles. It's no longer about Issa being a threat to Pike. It's about Issa showing others that he can be defied. The injured one spat. "You think this ends with you?" Taki stepped forward, calm and unshakable. "It ends when you stop trying to own what was never yours." The 3 men limped away, dragging their wounds through the brush like ghosts, being EXORCI, SED. And Issa? She stood tall, not trembling, not afraid, not because she believed she couldn't die, but because now she knew this. If death ever came for her again, it would be on her terms. She walked to the river, washed the blood from her hands. The water carried it away like it never belonged. "I didn't think I'd ever be able to fight again," She said. But you did, Taki answered. Not because I'm brave, she whispered. Because I had no choice. And he knelt beside her, voice low and certain. Bravery is doing it anyway. That's the moment everything truly shifted. Issa was no longer surviving. She was claiming space. Taking back the ground they once thought she'd never walk on again. It wasn't about violence. It was about voice. It wasn't about revenge. It was about saying, I'm not yours to break anymore. And that right there is the kind of freedom no one can steal. Silence or shame. Some stories don't end, they evolve. They don't fade with time, they echo. Not because they were shouted loudly, but because they were lived quietly. With fire in the heart and dirt beneath the feet. Issa's story became one of those. She never returned to Hollow Rock to live. There was no grand parade, no public reckoning. She didn't need it. Her justice wasn't about standing over her enemies. It was about standing outside their reach, beyond the town limits, beyond the past, beyond their power. Instead, she and Taki built something deeper. Not a fortress of stone, but a home of quiet resilience. Deep in the woods where the trees grew thick and the wind sang through pine, they raised walls from clay, patched with moss and bark. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Built not from wealth or tradition, but from survival, trust, and the kind of love that doesn't need to speak its name. No children filled their home. But that doesn't mean their legacy was silent, because the forest began to whisper. Travelers, passing near the ridges, spoke of a woman who moved through the woods like wind seen only when she chose to be. Children, daring each other to wander too far, would return wide-eyed, clutching small gifts they claimed were left for them. Dried herbs, carved feathers, a small pendant with markings no one could read. They'd say, she doesn't walk like other women. She walks like the ground won't betray her. And no one laughed, because even Hollow Rock had changed. The whipping post disappeared one night, burned in secret. The sheriff retired quietly and early. Ezra Pike left town under a cloud of rumors and silence that stuck to his name like soot. The town had tried to erase her, but all they did was give birth to something they couldn't control, a legend. Outside her home, carved above the doorway, was a name, Wika Wapi, the woman who rises like stars, not because she was feared, not because she sought worship, but because she refused to stay beneath anyone's foot. Issa's pain had become something else, not a scar to hide, but a map. A guide for every girl, every soul who ever felt unseen. Her story was told by fires, in the hush of lullabies, in the knowing glances shared when injustice showed its face again. Have you ever wondered what real power looks like? It's not in who yells the loudest. It's in who endures, who rebuilds, who chooses to stand again and again when no one expects them to. That's what Issa did. She never asked the world to give her back what it stole. She made something new from what remained. And in her final days, sitting beside Taki beneath a sky littered with stars, she would whisper, "They tried to take everything." And he would answer without hesitation, "And still, you became everything." That's not a fairy tale. That's a roadmap. For every person watching this who has ever been cast out, counted out, or cut down, remember, you don't have to return to the place that broke you to prove you survived. Sometimes just becoming is the most powerful story you can tell. And if anyone ever asks who Issa was, the answer is simple. She was not a victim. She was not just a survivor. She was a woman who rose like stars, like truth, like fire that never asked for permission to burn. Some stories are not about winning. They're about becoming. About choosing not to be defined by what happened to you, but by what you did with it. Issa's story is one of those rare stories, the kind that doesn't end with revenge or applause, but with something deeper. Selfhood. Let's rewind to where it all began. A girl standing barefoot in the middle of a dusty town square, wrists bound, back bleeding, not for breaking the law, but for saying one word. No. No to Ezra Pike. No to being traded like property. No to the quiet, choking violence of expectation. That one word turned her into a public disgrace. And yet, it was the most honest thing she'd ever said. The town called it dishonor. But they didn't see the strength it took to speak, against a system that fed on silence. But one person did see it. Taki. A man of few words, of steady hands and eyes like stone. He didn't step forward. He didn't stop the whipping. He did something. Harder, he remembered. And when Issa ran into the forest that night, carrying nothing but pain and will, he was the one who found her, not to rescue her, but to stand beside her. And in the forest, something remarkable happened. Issa didn't just heal. She rebuilt. She learned to survive not because someone taught her every step, but because someone believed she could. She cut roots, set traps, bound wounds. And one day, when she was strong enough to stand again, Taki handed her a carved pendant with a new name etched into it. One who walks through fire and lives. That's when Issa stopped being a victim. Not because the world got softer, but because she got louder, even in her silence. Every skill she learned, every night she endured, was a declaration. You didn't end me. When she returned to Hollow Rock, it wasn't to burn it down. She didn't confront Pike. She didn't confront the sheriff. She didn't have to. She walked through that town like she belonged, because now she did, on her own terms. She gave medicine to the people. She passed Pike's window without flinching. And the town, the same town that had watched her bleed, now watched her in silence. But this time, it wasn't power that kept them quiet. It was awe. And when Pike sent men to finish what the whipping post had started, Issa didn't run. She fought, just as Taki had taught her. Knife in hand, breath steady, eyes unwavering. And when the last man limped away, Issa said it clearly. If Pike sends men again, they won't leave breathing. It wasn't rage. It was clarity. And that, right there, is the heart of this story. It's not about vengeance. It's not about proving your worth to those who never deserved your truth. It's about standing in your skin, in your scars, and saying, I am not what you did to me. I am what I chose to become after. Issa never went back to live in the town. She didn't need their approval, their redemption, or their memory. But her story didn't vanish. It took root. It became legend. Children whispered of a woman in the woods, of gifts left on trails, of a figure who moved like wind and never bowed. And above her door, carved into wood, were the words, Wika Wapi, the woman who rises like stars. Not worshipped. Not feared. Just seen. So if you've ever felt erased, if you've ever been punished for being different, loud, brave, or honest, remember Issa. You don't need to be forgiven by the ones who broke you. You don't need revenge to reclaim your power. You just need to rise. Because strength doesn't come from proving others wrong. It comes from proving to yourself that you were always more than what they allowed you to be. And sometimes, that's how legends are born. If Issa's journey spoke to something in you, something quiet, something burning, don't let it fade. Here, share this story. Let someone else remember they too can rise. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because more voices like Issa's are out there, waiting to be heard. And here, we tell stories that don't just survive, they endure.